welcome to our fifth Regional Transportation Dialogue for this year. This is the first time that we are looking at aviation in the region and some of the advancements around aviation. And so I'm excited to see our program today and to hear from our speakers. As we'll put into the chat for you the program for the day. It can also be found on the LTC website. And so we can go through, what we're going to be having today. So we are going to have a really great slate of individuals speaking, starting with Clint Harper, who is the Advanced Air Mobility Program Manager from Urban Movement Labs. We have Justin Bychek, who is the Vice President and Senior Project Manager and Group Director from HNTB. And then we have Michael Aluos, who is a management consultant, but has been working closely with the San Bernardino International Airport on their green management plan. So we'll be looking at the two major airports, but also thinking about some regional advancements that are occurring, looking at aviation. I'd like to welcome our major sponsor and major partner in this dialogue series, Matt Bushman, to give a few words to get us started.
Yes, thank you, Kimberly. HNTB is a transportation infrastructure company. We do all types of transportation and typically the biggest, most complicated projects in any area. So here in the Inland Empire, we're involved in some of the toll road system expansions. We're doing the Ontario Tunnel. We're doing a number of different projects at Ontario Airport, and we're happy to be a founding sponsor really of Leonard Transportation Center and a big advocate for these transportation series. So I'm excited to hear from each of these local experts as they share about aviation and its impacts on the Inland Empire.
All right, thanks so much, Matt. We'll move on with our first poll question, because we like to get people thinking about the topic and beginning to just kind of lay it out there. So Rafi, our first poll, how important is the aviation industry concerning the movement in goods in the IE? So really thinking about the importance of aviation within our region. And again, no wrong answers, just throwing it out there to get people to begin thinking about where we are. Would you show us the results? I don't think they're going to be too too different than we would think, but it's very important. And so it is an important part. It's not, I don't believe, if you look at all the discussions that go around mobility in a region, the ideas of aviation aren't always there, but it's a very important part, which is one of the reasons that we're looking at it today. Okay, with that, I'd like to welcome up our first speaker, Clint Harper, with who's the Advanced Air Mobility.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk about advanced air mobility. It's a topic that's extremely important to me. And just a little bit of background on myself. So my aviation career began back in the late 90s. I got my start in the United States Air Force as a flight line avionics maintainer. And after working on airplanes for 6 years, I kind of seen how battered up, some of the older people were in the career field. So I decided that I didn't want to put myself through that. I wanted to, wanted to preserve my body and preserve my sanity. So I decided to cross train into airport management, and that really opened up a whole new world of aviation, that I hadn't experienced before on the management side, on the operations side, on the planning side. It really opened a lot of doors and gave me a lot of the skill sets that I use even to this day. And I'm incredibly grateful for that experience that the Air Force has given me. In 2014, I retired and went back to school to obtain a degree. I always loved cities. I was fascinated at how cities had transformed themselves and just how that whole process worked. And so I pursued a degree in city planning, and I achieved a master's degree in city metropolitan planning from the University of Utah, as well as an urban design graduate certificate. And my goal was to pair all this together to make aviation more accessible, to integrate aviation into communities. And I started doing that work with small airports in the state of Utah as the airport system planner, or the state airport system planner. As I was gaining traction on introducing aviation as a community asset, as in introducing airports as underutilized transportation infrastructure, the advanced air mobility industry really started taking off in 2016 with the publication of the Uber's urban air mobility white paper. And so now that led to this position today, which I'm happy to share, the work that I've been doing for Urban Movement Labs over the past year and a half or so. So next slide, please. And the next one. So what really got us here, if we can look back at Los Angeles's history with transportation technology and mobility innovation, we can look back as recent as 2012 when ride sharing was deployed and really challenged how the public right of ways were being utilized within cities and communities. In 2016, the LADOT published the Urban Mobility in a Digital Age document that talked about the new challenges that were afoot with these emerging technologies, with public services, ride sharing, all those things, and how they were going to impact transportation planning into the future. And then immediately in 2017, that plan got some work when electric scooters were deployed and appeared overnight on city streets, and the city really, in cities across the nation, understood how important it was to be able to plan for new mobility innovation and new technology. And having a technology such as electric scooters just appear on streets overnight, really put a lot of communities in a tough position to where they were forced to be reactive rather than proactive around the planning and integration of these kind of technologies. In 2017, the UAM industry first announced its intentions of looking at Los Angeles as an initial launch market. In 2018, LADOT started utilizing the mobility data specification, which is a way for the city to push and enforce digital policies around transportation technologies such as electric scooters. In 2019, the Urban Movement Labs was initially formed in the mayor's office, and we were originally envisioned to be a transportation incubator that would reach out and work with the industry to understand how the industry is evolving, what needs are they trying to meet, the residents within the city, and then also work with the industry so they can understand, what are the true pain points of a city, where is the transportation system struggling to keep up, and how might these new technologies, be best leveraged in a future transportation system. In 2020, Urban Movement Labs separated from the mayor's office and became a standalone 501c3 nonprofit organization with a partnership with the city to work. Next slide, please. To work in between the intersection of government, industry, and the community. And this timeline just kind of shows, from 2017 on to 2021, this is just a snippet of some of the headlines, that have involved urban air mobility, advanced air mobility, or Los Angeles. And you can see that it's growing, not just within Los Angeles, but within the Southern California market as a whole. Next slide. And as I was saying, the Urban Movement Labs, we'd like to see ourselves as being positioned between government, business, and community. So with this, we can hear from the government, we can hear what the needs are, we can work with businesses and the industry. So right now, Urban Movement Labs has a number of aircraft OEM partners who are manufacturing electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. And that's typically called eVTOLs for short. As well as some existing urban air mobility operators that utilize helicopters today, and so we hope to leverage, these relationships to help communities understand, how this industry is evolving and how it's more likely to intersect with communities early on. If you look at the news, a lot of times you see headlines, that mention the Jetsons, flying cars, this really futuristic Blade Runner type stuff, but we know that when aircraft are first certified in 2025, it's going to be operated in an aviation system very, very similar to how aviation is operated today. So departing and taking off from traditional airports, using the existing airspace structure, the way it's organized today, so on and so forth. And so we want to make sure that we're not getting lost in the future, but are planning today. Next slide. Now, the goals of the Advanced Air Mobility Partnership between Urban Movement Labs and the City of Los Angeles is to really engage and educate community members. So our initial outreach, we conducted outreach and education to community-based organizations, transportation advocacy groups, local research institutions, and it was really about creating a common lexicon of where urban air mobility actually was, what it was as a technology, what it had to offer, and what it didn't have to offer, and what it was not. And that's particularly, it is not flying cars. We aren't going to see these aircraft landing on roadways, departing from our driveways. A lot of things that you can that sometimes the media can make confusing on there. So, we really wanted to get out there and do an initial round of education, so that we all knew exactly what this technology was, but also interface, with our industry partners to help us understand how the initial launch is being shaped, and how might the city be able to participate in some of the decision making and some of the early policy making that's going to shape how this industry scales. And of course, we want to make sure that Los Angeles and the Los Angeles region, a leader in this. If we're expected to be an initial launch market, we want to be proactive and be thoughtful about how this is going to integrate into our communities and be smart about it. And really to demonstrate, through all the lessons that we've learned with planning for different transportation modes, from the rail system to the highway system, getting rid of our old train lines and our light rail systems and replacing with buses and then replacing with single occupancy vehicles. We've made a lot of mistakes in some ways. We have a lot of lessons learned, and we want to demonstrate how we can show that we've learned from those past transportation planning decisions and create a more equitable aviation system and create a more equitable transportation system that includes aviation. Next slide, please. And so this can only be done through collaboration, and so typically, aviation is seen, at a national level as a part of the transportation system. So the FAA falls under US DOT. At the state level, you see a similar construct where state Department of Transportation's house an aeronautics authority or an aeronautics division that conducts airport planning, prioritizes airport investments. But once we get down into the local level, there's some questions on where this is going to happen. Who's this going to intersect first? Is it going to be the Department of Airports? Is it going to be the Department of Transportations? Or if most of the infrastructure is going to be privately developed, will it be city planning offices? So how can we best reach across all the different actors within a city to help them understand how this technology is going to intersect them and how we can provide the information that they're going to need to make informed decisions and guide this work and guide the implementation as it moves forward. Next slide. So through this work, through the past, since 2020, we've been creating a foundation, and a knowledge base around urban air mobility and now advanced air mobility. So the first product that we developed was a collaboration between the World Economic Forum and the City of Los Angeles, a number of industry actors, and some other communities. And what resulted from that was the 7 principles of the urban sky. And that's what you see on the first plate there in the first panel. And what this was, it was a way to communicate out to the industry, what are the priorities that you should have top of mind when you go working with a community. So when you approach a community, we don't want to hear, that you're here to solve congestion. We know that the transportation issues across the region are much more dynamic than just solving congestion with one singular modal solution. So what are the things that you can think about before you reach out to communities? And these 7 principles are what have emerged from that collaborative effort. In 2021, the Los Angeles Department of Transportation released the Urban Air Mobility Policy Framework Considerations document. And what this does is established a high-level vision for the city and how the city of Los Angeles might see urban air mobility taking shape within the city as a way to complement the existing transportation system. We understand that urban air mobility and advanced air mobility is not a silver bullet to any of the transportation system's woes. But we do see it as an integral part of a holistic solution. And so how can we leverage this new aviation technology and the new vision and capabilities that it has as a part of the transportation system, with other parts, with other modes, and with other initiatives. And then also in 2021, we published a short report through Urban Movement Labs on the results of our initial engagement. So this is what we learned from talking to transportation advocacy groups, community-based organizations, the research institutions that we reached out to, and what the community priorities are shaping up to be. And I'll caveat that this is very, very early, and the outreach that we were able to conduct in the first year, while I think we had over 120 individual engagements, that still represents a small area of a city of 4 million people. And so there's still a lot of work to be done on that. And we're our primary job is to add a bandwidth for the city, so they can continue focusing on the issues of today, such as homelessness, the housing crisis, public safety, things like this. Urban Movement Labs adds the additional staff and the additional bandwidth to start looking at what does the future look like in terms of transportation innovation, and providing a foundation of information so that the city is not starting from scratch when this technology may or may not emerge overnight and become a reality. Next slide. And with that, I'll turn the time back over. I'm happy to answer any questions, during the allocated time. And again, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and to present, and look forward to continuing this discussion. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Clint. I have a ton of questions, but I'm going to reserve them to the end because I'm very interested in engaging further on these ideas of what does it really mean for our urban areas, but also, what does it mean for our larger sort of spread out geographical regions? So maybe put that in your mind, and then we can talk about that in a bit. I'd like to, before we have our next speaker, our next presenter, have our next poll question. So thinking about the integration of aviation into a multimodal transportation system. So how do we bring aviation as a larger part of the multimodal conversation, trains, automobiles, and then I'll put planes in there or something of a similar impact. So thoughts on that? All right, let's close out this poll and take a look and see. Very similar to what we had last time. Very important, 63% and important, And when you're working with a 5-point Likert scale, what really is the difference between very important, important in some of these questions? But we throw those out there. Okay, thank you very much, Rafi. And with that, I'd like to invite our next speaker, Justin Bychek from HNTB, as we move east through our conversation this morning. And Justin will, please.
All right. Well, thank you, Kimberly. Good morning, everyone. Justin Bychek with HNTB. I'm a Southern California resident, lifelong, educated in the public school system, UC Berkeley, undergraduate, master's degrees. And I've been working in aviation planning ever since I graduated. Been very much interested since a young child, looking up at the LAX approach and departure path from my house where I grew up, and just trying to understand how it all worked. And now I've had the opportunity to work in that field for over 15 years. It's pretty exciting. And what I wanted to share today are just some interesting updates over at Ontario International Airport. So I've had the privilege of working with these folks since about 2009, and only in about 2016, Ontario International Airport reverted back to local control. OIAA, Ontario International Airport Authority, is the agency now running that airport, and I've been helping them guide airport planning, different development projects on airport. Wanted to share a little bit of updates today with the group. So if we can go to next couple slides here, can pass over this one. Just wanted to cover a few things today with everyone. State of the Union, so talking about what activities looking like at the airport. Everyone's probably sick of talking about COVID, but I think it's important to look at how this airport's recovered, and it's really telling when we look at the numbers to see how fast the recovery's been, particularly at this airport, and when you compare that to some of the other Southern California airports. Thinking through the opportunities and challenges that arise, there's a lot of opportunity for growth. There's a lot of projects ongoing. I'm going to cover a few of them under the planning for the future. And then just some of the considerations about staying ahead of the curve going forward and what we need to be mindful of. So we can advance through this next one. One more, please. So just wanted to share a couple slides about activity recovery. So just like everyone was aware, significant drop-offs in activity during the pandemic, but what's really striking is the very rapid recovery of Ontario International Airport, consistently hitting about 500,000 passengers per month. We're exceeding pre-pandemic levels. And it's happened much quicker than originally forecast. FAA publishes what's called a terminal area forecast. And originally, and even most recently, they're looking at recovery to pre-pandemic levels in 2024. And we're going to exceed that yet this year in this fiscal year already. When we look at the next slide, which has the rolling average or rolling counts of annual passenger activity, we're going to expect about 6 million passengers more or less this year. So again, absolutely increase over the 2019 record that we had while we continue to build activity at this airport. And it's really striking for those that have been through the facility recently. It's busy every day. The curbside peak periods and spreading beyond the peak periods is just getting really busy. And there's a lot of interesting challenges to have and to solve, great problems to have, and really telling that the local economy is booming. And this is just one side of the coin, the passenger side. For those that shopped online during the pandemic, didn't go into stores and continue to do so, e-commerce has been booming in this area as well. And it's been a huge reason why the airport stayed afloat financially during the pandemic as well. Let's go to the next slide. I wanted to share a little bit about the existing state of airport land uses. So maybe as recent as 4 or 5 years ago, there was a lot of developable land that was identified on the airport. The area to the east there that looks like a boot that's in that whitish yellow color. It's recently been announced as air cargo development. I'll talk a little bit about that in just a few minutes. But there's been a lot of interest in the airport. Developers wanting to come in and construct cargo facilities, new air service. What we had maybe a few years ago with hundreds of acres available for developable land has really shrunk recently to maybe 50, 60 acres of area that really hasn't been developed yet. So really exciting opportunities to modernize existing facilities, increase revenue, and diversify the revenue stream at the airport, and taking advantage of perhaps some of the technologies that Clint spoke about as well. So if we can go to the next slide and just pass over this transition. I want to talk a little bit about some of the opportunities and challenges here that relate to Ontario's continued growth. I think cargo and logistics are obvious. It really powers the region. Tons of construction of warehouses in Chino and Ontario, continuing to build millions of square footage of warehouse space. That comes as a challenge too, right? Being able to accommodate the aeronautical demand associated with it, getting cargo off of planes, but also making sure that we're reducing the amount of truck trips in the region. Having the cargo go where it wants to be and where it wants to be sorted is a real big consideration. Continuing down the left side, air service, the airport's continuing to grow. We're adding new routes. We're recovering routes that were previously lost in the pandemic. And there's a lot of international interest too, taking advantage of the 10 million residents in the catchment area. Having an efficient and well-maintained airfield is really important. It's a challenge with FAA funding right now. Lots of airports, particularly in the Southern California region, are going through airfield improvement programs to modernize their airfield, to rebuild and reconstruct pavement. Competing for funds is a big challenge, and we want to make sure that the facilities that we have at this airport are top-notch. Being a good neighbor is a key consideration. Having a lot of additional activity comes with consequences, and making sure that the airport's doing its due diligence in both NEPA and CEQA and outreach are key considerations. And some of the other key things to talk about too, customer service can't be overlooked. Making sure that the folks at the airport and the community are engaging and really advertising why this facility is a great gem in the region, that you don't have to drive an hour and a half or 2 hours over to LAX and sit in traffic for hours and hours and hours. And then not to be forgotten is the multimodal piece. We just saw that poll question, but it's so critical. And there's a lot of infrastructure going into place right now, and both in the planning and design stage, that's really going to improve that and hopefully reduce congestion as we go forward in time. Let's go to the next one. So starting off with cargo and logistics, I mentioned that boot property on the east side. OIA just had an RFP out there for development of that blue property called the boot property. through CBRE. And 29 parcels totaling about 150 acres were put out to market, trying to understand how best to take advantage of this property. And if we take a look at the next slide, which has a little bit of a site plan of what they're thinking, we're talking about over 3 million square feet of warehouse, lots of truck parking, vehicle parking, opportunities for commerce to really boom in the area, take advantage of all the aeronautical facilities in there, but also being forward thinking and thinking about how technology can enhance the efficiency of buildings, looking at high cube warehousing, looking at how perhaps eVTOLs, as Clint talked about, could service and do that last mile transportation of freight, really trying to make sure that these facilities are flexible and can stand the test of time as technology continues to evolve and evolve very quickly. Go to the next one. I mentioned having a safe and efficient airfield. We've gone through a pretty robust planning process to make sure that this airfield can stand the test of time, can accommodate the wide range of air traffic that is forecast to come to the airport. This is a depiction of what's on the airport layout plan. The pink there is proposed new pavement, just some additional taxiways, some geometric improvements, but also some runway rehabilitation that's about to go forward here. And it's really important that we maintain safe and efficient operations to make this airport an attractive place to operate and be able to safely and efficiently accommodate the demand that's there. We've done some pretty interesting and innovative simulation. If we look at the next slide and click through the video, to help make the case with FAA about why we need to actually improve some of these taxiways to make this airport safer. I don't know if the video is live, if you can click the next one. There it goes. So we've used fast time simulation, working very closely with the FAA tower to be able to quantify the safety and efficiency benefits of some of these taxiway reconfiguration projects to make sure that we're minimizing the amount of time that aircraft spend on the runways so that we can get that next aircraft down or the next aircraft up, and using safety risk assessments to prioritize funding in a very sophisticated way. And we're hopeful that that will positively impact the amount of revenue and funding that we'll get from FAA going forward in some of these airfield improvement programs. Go to the next one. Folks are probably familiar with this in the region as the multimodal connection. HNTB is working as the program manager for this project to connect Rancho Cucamonga Station with the airport and some sort of innovative technology. I called this presentation Planes, Quasi-Trains, and Automobiles. I guess we could call this the quasi-train technology to be finalized as we work through it. But really the interesting opportunity is to connect to this multimodal destination, making the airport connect with Rancho Station, and then also having Rancho Station eventually connect with Brightline West and be able to go all the way seamlessly to Vegas. I think it will also significantly benefit employees locally in the region too, being able to take transit to the airport versus having to drive and perhaps getting some of those car trips off the regional roadways. Go to the next one, just to show a few images here. This is from SBCTA, but perhaps some of the renderings of what these vehicles could look like still to be determined as the planning continues. But there'll likely be 1 or 2 stations on airport that connect to the existing terminals that take you in a seamless journey out to the Rancho Cucamonga Station. But definitely significant opportunities for that multimodal connection point for passengers. Go to the next one. Cheap photo of me here with the customer service experience at the last state of the airport, but you can't understate the importance of engaging with the community, making the travel experience seamless, providing that best experience to all passengers and customers, whether it's actual passengers or cargo operators, and making things efficient. Marketing the airport to the local and to the local residents. We've got 10 million plus Southern California residents in the catchment area. Being that convenient, that efficient, that safe airport that you can get in and out of, connect to different multimodal opportunities, I think is really critical. And then also having the board, the great leadership, President Wapner, the management team, the chiefs, and the staff all in alignment, continuing to operate and grow this airport. And like I said, the cutest dogs that are very friendly and will reduce your stress on your travel experience. Okay, go to the next one. Just lastly, one more slide here. Staying ahead of the curve, what's next for the airport? Continuing to think through how to responsibly accommodate that future aeronautical demand, not just putting it wherever it needs to be, taking advantage of the last few parcels that we have available, but also modernizing facilities. And we can do that to reduce congestion on the roads. We can do that to reduce congestion in the airport and on the airside facilities. Taking advantage of growing and accommodating air cargo to make sure that we're bringing in the facilities where they want to be, since we're building all this warehouse space in the region. It certainly has some cumulative benefits to the region to have those operations fly into Ontario rather than fly into LAX or somewhere on the west side and be trucked anyways all the way across the basin. But also embracing new technologies to improve our efficiencies, lower costs, and continue to make Ontario International Airport the wonderful place it is, very attractive to operate and bring in new and exciting service to the airport and to the region. I think that's all I have, so I'll say thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Justin. So let's go to our next poll question. And Justin, I have lots of questions for you as well in this, seeing how this all fits together. So how sustainable do you think airport facilities are? Very sustainable, moderately sustainable, or not sustainable? It's a big question. There's a lot of moving parts to it. So it's a piece considering what we take into, all consideration of what an airport facility means. I'll show the results. So this one's a bit more mixed, moderately sustainable, 59%, our largest sort of perspective. And then we have very sustainable and not sustainable. So our next speaker, Michael Alawas, will share a bit about sustainability in airports. And it's Michael, please.
Thank you, Kimberly, and good morning to everyone. I'd like to put things in perspective before I begin with the airport and where it's come from. The airport began as a municipal airport in 1941 under the Army Corps jurisdiction and a training base to meet the needs of training 30,000 pilots. In July of 1942, the airport was renamed to San Bernardino Army Airfield, and the San Bernardino Air Depot was established. The facility's primary function was to repair and maintain aircraft, which is still partially true today. In May of 1950, the base was renamed to Norton Air Force Base, and in 1989, it was put on the base closure list, and the last facilities were abandoned in 1995 and officially closed. So the airport is actually not necessarily started from scratch. It's had to go through a number of different iterations and reinvent itself. Next slide, please. So the airport is, they're a great group of folks out there, and it's a little bit like the Wild Wild West. Almost anything goes, and you can think, it's encouraged to think outside the box. A lot of it is last minute thinking, but the results are always there. There's a great board of directors for not just Sabia, but also the IVDA, which encircles the airport, the Inland Valley investment, and they do an amazing job moving forward. So if you all folks know that the airport really has not been a domestic carrier, but this last August 4th, we introduced Breeze Airways, which now has nonstop flights daily to San Francisco and Provo, Utah, which is a huge advancement for the airport because we have a domestic terminal, but it hasn't been used in decades, if you will. The airplanes that they're using are the Embraer E95, which is a single aisle, two and two seats, really comfortable, and it's pretty inexpensive to fly. What the nice thing is though that the airport offers a $5 a day parking. So bring your tricycles, bicycles, and maybe some EVs, and we'll have you covered something pretty inexpensive. Next slide, please. So since the airport was able to start from scratch, they were able to create their own new website for the airport and invite new passengers and experience a totally different experience of driving up to an airport that is basically brand new, is repurposed, and you get on, you get off, and it's pretty quick to move through the process. And the reservation, the booking system is state of the art. Next slide. So the San Bernardino Airport was ranked the top 20 airports in the United States for cargo. And as you know, we have UPS since 2018 employs over 400 employees, and FedEx 2018 as well, over 100 employees. And everyone's known that Amazon Air, which is our new tenant there since 2021, it has an amazing facility that they've established there for their processing of product going in and out with 2,100 jobs and still growing today. Next slide. So as I mentioned earlier, the airport is still heavily involved in MRO, the maintenance and repair and overhaul, with AeroPro that does a lot of the painting and some of the interior work, certified aviation, maintain and modification installation, as well as some overhaul. The executive jet maintenance of heavy maintenance and airframe and avionics repair. And of course, Unical, which I'm sure you've seen a lot of the aircraft sitting over there, older aircraft that sometimes are repurposed and sold off to other countries and or disassembled for their parts, since a lot of them are no longer manufactured and made, which is a huge business for those folks and has been recently sold off to another organization. But they're a great partner and a good tenant for the airport. Next slide. So as I mentioned with Amazon Air, they're a model for what an airport can be. They have 5.6 megawatts of solar on their rooftop, and all of their ground support equipment is all EV. It's all electric, and they're also, I understand, are looking at some hydrogen vehicles as well. They also have been very efficient with their landscaping and water-wise, trees covering parking lots to keep things cool. They've also repurposed, when they're building their facility, 75% reduction in landfill waste, which is basically a mandate from the state of California, but they are an overachiever at 75%. And environmentally friendly paints. Again, they're a model that many airports can look to and look up to. Next slide. So we have something pretty unique over at the airport. We have Luxair, which is our executive terminal, and 5-star service, and it's just an amazing experience when you utilize this facility. So when pilots come in, drop off their passengers, and they have a layover, they have a special office they can go to get their emails, flight plans, things of that nature. If they need something to eat or anything, we have like a full little mini cafeteria that they can go and get whatever refreshments and food that they may need. We even have a library there, as well as a theater. If they want to watch any type of movie, they can just hang out in the theater and just chill out. We also have some sack time, a little bedroom there they can get some rest, and just a simple lounge area. This is an amazing place. It's a beautiful building, and I encourage everyone to come and visit. Next slide. So we were, I was tasked to do a green energy element. The CEO, he wanted to initiate a CAP program, Climate Action Plan, but not call it a Climate Action Plan or its normal way of doing things. He wanted this to read more like a business plan. And this is what we ended up doing. And we were able to get this approved by the SABIA board, and is now posted on our website. There's a link down there at the bottom if anyone cares to go there, and later on I can put this in the chat for the link as well. Next slide. So part of the green energy element that we're working towards and on is this repurposing of an old capped landfill from the old Norton Air Force Base days that is no longer in use, and it's lined and capped, and it's no longer outgassing. So we wanted to utilize the slope area of the landfill, and we're able to engineer about 3.01 megawatts of solar power there. And we already did the glare study, and it all comports, and it's not an issue with that. And if this becomes something that we want to do more so in the future, we can convert the top of it for another 9 megawatts of solar power, and that would be about a total of 12 megawatts. And we're looking at, instead of putting this back into the grid, to convert this into hydrogen and use it on site. which is much more economical, because as you know, solar is pretty inexpensive these days, and the tariffs to put it back into the grid won't pay for the project. So you have to get creative in how you're going to make this pencil out. So right now we're still on the planning stages, even though we have the initial engineering pretty much done. Next slide. So if anyone's ever heard of the $7 billion hydrogen grant project that the DOE has put out, the airport has decided to go after some of those monies and put together our own little cluster to be able to produce hydrogen on site. But we're also inviting other entities out there within our area to join us, and we're getting some great success to build our own little cluster. And the whole idea is to make this distributed, because hydrogen is very unique in the sense that it's very difficult to transfer with piping. The piping is very expensive. It's typically stainless steel. You can't use normal piping because the molecule is too small. And we have within less than 5 miles from us, the intermodal in San Bernardino, that we can move the hydrogen around via train. We can also have a small little infrastructure of piping in and around our airport, and perhaps one of the Indian tribes as well. And also within less than a half a mile away, there is the Edison power plant that's right there that's fired by natural gas, that perhaps we could get that converted over to hydrogen. Since hydrogen is 2.5 times the energy density of natural gas, it might be a plausible way of moving forward. There is a state conglomerate or hub that's been working called Arches, and they're trying to make this a statewide effort that the university system as well as the state of California will go after these funds, since the federal government is looking at anywhere from 6 to 8 hubs to produce the hydrogen. The problem is that they want 50 to 100 tons of manufacturing of hydrogen per day, which is not going to be done at one facility. It's going to be done at multiple facilities. So we're looking forward to this challenge. And on top of that, most of you might not be aware, there's some hydrogen helicopters going to be coming online the first part of next year. They're doing some testing. They're way ahead of the power curve. A lot of folks are thinking 2030, and they're actually making some great advances on that. And we want to be the launch platform for that, with also being able to produce and use the hydrogen on site. Next slide, please. So this is something we've been working on for about a year or so right now, the Southern California Make Ready program for EV charging. We have 130 EV charging stations going in 6 locations in and around the airport. We'll reduce the carbon footprint over a 10-year period by over 10 million kilograms of CO2. And so far, the status of this is we've got a lot of the draft engineering that's done by Edison. We're in the final stage on 2 locations for the engineering, and we hope to have 2 of the facilities and 2 of the sites up and running before the end of the year. One being the domestic terminal is the first one going in. We're pretty excited about this because it didn't cost the airport anything. The way we negotiated this with Edison, with the rebate, since we're in a DAC, the disadvantaged community, as well as it made it pretty interesting for some of the third parties to take ownership in this and give the airport branding and branding rights, as well as informational contact within their video screens, which is pretty exciting for us. Next slide. So we also are working on a 4 DCFC charging stations, which is the fast charging at the airport itself for Lyft and Uber. Sorry, I misspelled Lyft there. An I instead of a Y. But and so we're working through that as well, and that will also be a third party, which won't cost the airport anything other than helping through the process, as well as providing the land. We're also in some final engineering stages on 4 fast charging stations internally for our ground support equipment. We already have two ground support equipment that's all electric, staircase and lav truck, and we're working on expanding that. We have about 76 vehicles that are targeted to get converted over to EV and or hydrogen vehicles. Next slide. This is an exciting prospect that we have, or actually ongoing at the airports. It's our UAS Center. Next slide. So what this is a training platform at the airport for people who want to learn how to fly drones, and they also want to get certified as a drone pilot. This is amazing because we're partnered with a number of different folks out there, including some spin-offs from Caltech on some of their technology. They've also been testing at the airport and helping us along the way. Next slide. There's a number of things. I probably should unclick that. If you keep clicking down there, you have to be 16 years old and be able to read and speak English, the physical and mental conditions to be spot on, and pass an FAA Part 107 exam. Another click. And pass a background check. Next slide. And so what the airport does is, through the UAS Center, is they help you test, not test, but they prepare you for the test for the Part 107 pilot's license. And this pilot's license, once you get it, it's also good for regular aircraft as well. Obviously, you have to go through ground training and things of the nature and actually flying. But it also, if you want to do this on a professional basis, you have to have a license to be able to do this on a professional basis. And this is what we're here to service. The airport so far, the UAS Center has trained over 200 individuals, and they're also have been working on helping with policy. This is still new. You can fly at the airport under 50 pounds with cargo and everything of that nature. But beyond that, it's still it's unknown. We're still working on trying to help the local municipalities deal through this, and also through the FAA, so that we can, in the future, have some of these drones do some of the tasks that they use with large helicopters and the like. The fire department is extremely excited about this for more of the heavier drones, so they can take some of the equipment to forward bases and drop them off, instead of having their firefighters hump these things all the way up to the front, and they're exhausted by the time they get there. We can simply drop this off. There's been some testing that we have that we've been able to take a couple hose packs and under the flight, under the 50-pound limit, and drop them off to a forward base. And we're working on things of that nature, as well as bridge inspections and things like that, which is saving a lot of time and money and effort. Next slide. So this is what some of the things we're doing at the airport. Again, as I mentioned, this airport, a bit of the Wild Wild West, which is wonderful because we get to reinvent ourselves and work on the sustainability and what we're going to be in the future. They're doing an amazing job with this, and I'm just so very grateful to be part of this journey. So with that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Michael. That was great. Again, 3 really interesting presentations that I think will bring about a great conversation following. We have one more poll question for you before we get wrapped up, just so you're getting to think about the conversation. And Rafi, would you? So which of these advancements, technologies will be the most influential in the aviation industry in the next 10 years? Again, it's all just kind of guesswork, but you can throw it out there. Drones, the vertical takeoff, manned vehicles. I know it's not flying cars, but we're calling it that, Clint. And then hyperloops and other. And we have UAVs, drones. They're kind of similar to the vertical takeoff manned vehicles, but we were thinking about unmanned versus manned vehicles, and then the hyperloops maybe out there at 13%. All right, thank you so much, everyone, for participating. So we have another question here, if there's ways to bring students for field trips and have guest speakers. Michael, I think that's for you. Can we bring more of our students into the airport?
Absolutely. In fact, there's we're working on something with the UAS Center as well, where we're going to have some build and fly competition for the drones. We're bringing that into the airport as well. And yes, we can work with our community outreach folks, Amber Casares, and that would handle something of that nature as well, to bring tours through and meet the folks at the top, the CEO, and take them around. We have a nice air-conditioned bus that they give them wonderful tours. in and around the airport. It's a very nice way to spend an afternoon or a morning.
All right, thank you, Mike. So I'd like to, if I can, just open it up with this multimodal conversation. And I believe that we have Doran Barnes from Foothill Transit here, as well as Aaron Rogers with Omnitrans, and to think about the possibilities and the multi-use that we heard from Michael, but as well as Justin's presentation and Clint. These were kind of topics that came across for me, and how do we bring this all together, and what are the projections or the ideas of how people are going to move in the future, right? So Clint, I'd like to start with you, and then others, please, if you could join in thinking about movement of the future, the multimodal possibilities. And then Justin, has there been any type of projections? We see those links from Brightline coming in. If people aren't flying to Las Vegas, are they using the train? What are their projections, as well as thinking about that? So Clint, let's start with you on that, if we can.
Sure. So, one of the things that got me really engaged in this industry, was in the original vision. Again, I talked about how the Uber white paper in 2016 kind of really kicked this all off, and within that paper, they envisioned advanced air mobility, so eVTOL aircraft, that would solve for longer trips, more complicated trips that otherwise would take a longer time over the ground, but then would tie into Uber's ground transportation ride sharing network to solve for that first last mile problem. And that's something that kind of rubbed me a little bit in the wrong way, and I thought that in order for this transportation intervention to be more equitable, we needed to integrate holistically into a multimodal solution. And transit agencies have been working for decades to solve for first and last mile solutions, create first and last mile solutions, and solve those kind of issues. And so some of my early talking points were to get away from this whole, we're going to tie into a whole nother, new system, ride sharing type of system, and potentially even bring more traffic onto the streets and more congestion, and tie into the existing transit networks, work with transit providers. And then that's another misstep, I think, the industry experienced early on is, similar to other transportation modes, when the internal combustion engine, enabled the car, all of a sudden, the light rail lines and the transit lines, we're seen as old news, and, the investment stopped into those facilities, and everything went into the personal automobile and enabling the highway system, so we've always abandoned, what was prior to make way for the new, and I think that's a lesson that we can learn and say, let's not abandon the prior, let's tie into the prior, I think now most transportation and transit planners, we wish we had the light rail lines and the transit network that we had in the past. I think that would provide a lot of solutions for today. And so how can we position advanced air mobility to bring some of that back, or to at least not make it any less relevant than it is today? Because I think if we can drive investment into multimodal facilities, that may include an aviation component, not only will the aviation users, which I think will initially be small, and even as it scales will be small, but we can extend benefits, into all the users of the transit systems, and so we can start looking at equity from that perspective of, just making the whole transportation system, better, more equitable, through the smart investment and smart planning of AAM infrastructure.
If I might just follow up, so do you foresee that there would be multiple airport sites, let's call them, or multiple aviation sites? So aviation would change. We wouldn't have these large facilities, maybe a few large facilities, but maybe a different version of the hub and spoke kind of conversation.
Yeah, I think so. Back in the early 2000s, NASA worked with the FAA, envisioned, a regional, more of a regional transportation system that they envisioned would be enabled by the small regional jets. I guess phenomenon, that was taken off, so that we were going to be able to connect smaller regional airports, take advantage of that existing infrastructure, and really bring new levels of connectivity to communities, that had smaller airports, but otherwise, might not have other transportation options. When the 2008 economic downturn hit and the recession hit, that whole, regional jet, effort, kind of fell apart. But I think it still highlighted the fact that we have these smaller airports, is underutilized transportation infrastructure, that we can leverage within the transportation system. And so I think within the areas, like Los Angeles, heavily urbanized areas, the desire, the vision is to bring aviation into or bringing aviation closer to final destinations through the development of vertiports, vertistops, other vertical takeoff and landing infrastructure. My work in Utah, knowing that we weren't, an early market by any stretch of the imagination, we looked at the converse of that vision. So how can we bring destinations closer to the existing infrastructure at the airports? And so we did a lot of work of studying the Aerotropolis concept that was posited by Dr. John Casarda out of North Carolina. Airport urbanism, which was looked at by MIT's Max Hirsch, to understand like what are the economic synergies that are created, when you plan an airport to be multimodal, and multimodal being, it can be a multimodal transit, it can be multimodal freight, just any kind of multimodal concept, creates those kind of synergies, and if we plan correctly, through a land use plan, a transportation plan, an economic development plan, we can extract those synergies to create jobs and create, new opportunities for communities. And my goal in Utah is to replicate what happens at large airports, at smaller airports. And that's really, what shaped my initial, vision for what AAM could be, by bringing aviation closer to destinations in urbanized areas, but bringing destinations closer to airports in the more rural areas to take advantage of that existing infrastructure and maximize it.
Thank you, Clint. Michael?
Thank you, Kimberly. I wanted to put my city council hat on for a moment. So we have the gold line that's being built through our city from Azusa going out to the Pomona. And that's going to be really good for not just our city, but all cities as well. And to Clint, to your point, is using some existing resources that we have to get these folks to and from different areas and places. And then hopefully we can get the state of California to extend it from Pomona to Claremont and beyond, and eventually get this out to Ontario Airport, which is really good. And then on top of that, San Bernardino is also looking at taking their ZEMU from Pomona all the way out to San Bernardino, which is really good. And as well as San Bernardino Airport's also looking at a small stretch from the airport to the intermodal to get folks to the airport. But the underlying issue and concern and problem that we have is security. People by and large are not wanting to use public transportation, and particularly the rail lines, because they don't feel safe. And women way outweigh men in not wanting to take public transportation. We need to address this in a big way to make this a reality, so people feel safe and do use these other modes of transportation to free up our highways and railways and things of that nature. So that's something we need to collectively do, is push back on some of these narratives of not having security on public transportation. So with that being said, I've said my piece, but it's something that we really need to look at if this is going to be successful.
All right, thank you, Michael. And then before we move on to Justin, I'd like to invite Aaron or Doran, any comments on thinking about the multimodal and bringing transit in with air?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I can jump in, Dr. Collins. Erin Rogers, I'm the CEO and General Manager for Omnitrans, and we're the public transit provider in the San Bernardino Valley. And thank you to all the presenters, so much great information. And we're kind of in the middle of a lot of different things that were talked about here today. I mean, we provide connections to both the Ontario Airport as well as the San Bernardino Airport. And, I'll start with Ontario because there's a lot of activity going on there. We're partnering with SBCTA to build, and we'll be the operator of the new BRT line that will go to the Rancho Cucamonga station as well as the airport. And then we're also partnering on the tunnel project, where we'll be the operator once the tunnel's built. in the meantime, what we've started is a service called Aunt Connect that is connecting the Rancho Cucamonga station to the airport with bus service right now to develop that market that later the tunnel would serve. And, you know, it's a challenge, timing the service. We're trying to time the service with Metrolink to get people to the airport. We're trying to make sure we're capturing people at the airport. Our regular bus service also goes into the Ontario airport, our Route 61. So that is available for people. And we're focusing really on employees as well as travelers. And right now our experience is we're getting more employees than we are travelers, because I think the idea is new to people. So no offense to San Bernardino Airport, but the $5 parking doesn't really help get people out of their cars. So, and then with San Bernardino Airport, we have a direct connection. We go onto the airport property, and there, really the genesis of that had a lot to do with Amazon Air and trying to time with their work schedules, again, for people who are working at the airport. So for us, there's a lot going on. We're also starting another direct connection. You all may know that Aero service, Aero Rail between San Bernardino and Redlands will be starting next Monday. And we will also, the ribbon cuttings this Friday will also be providing another direct shuttle service to meet those trains, meet those Metrolink trains at our downtown San Bernardino station. Again, they're focusing on the employees that are working in downtown San Bernardino. And that will be a direct shuttle service, again, that we'll be trying to time to meet those trains. So for us really being involved early in the conversation and understanding when things are changing and what the goals are, and I think all of the stakeholders understanding the goals, we have the resources to provide the connections. It's just a matter of timing everything right and marketing and having the right stakeholders involved when we're talking about all these things. So we have wonderful partners at both the airport and on the Cucamonga station partner. You know, our agency tagline is connecting our community. So we're kind of that link that brings all these bigger infrastructure pieces together that hopefully can make it all work. And that's really our goal. So we're excited about all these projects. We got a lot of work to do. But it's all good. It's exciting stuff.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much
Yeah.
for that. It's really great to hear. And Doran, any thoughts before we move on to Justin and his?
Well, hey, everybody. I'm Doran Barnes, Chief Executive Officer for Foothill Transit. We are the transit operator in Eastern LA County, and we have great connections to Omnitrans and Aaron System in Montclair and Pomona. So again, trying to create as seamless of a public transit system as we possibly can. I would put a giant punctuation mark behind what Aaron said about attracting employees. When we think about transit, if you think about the people coming in and out of the air system, the travelers are often infrequent users. There's a bunch of them, but they don't use it all the time. And figuring that out can be a bit complex. Again, as a transit guy, when I go to other communities, I try to use the public transportation system coming in and out of the airport. Sometimes I'm successful, sometimes not so much. Sometimes you find things like, you know, that flight of stairs you have to haul your bags up and down because you didn't know that flight of stairs was at a station somewhere down the line. It's daunting, and I think people have to be really committed to transit to use it in and out of the air system if they're not familiar with it. Employees, on the other hand, are great users because they're making a trip on a regular basis. They can make that part of their routine. And I think as we look to connecting public transit to the air system, to me, that's the biggest opportunity, more so than the infrequent traveler. The other thing that we've got to be looking at from a ground transportation system in general is how do we make things quicker? If I was to ride a Foothill bus to connect to one of Aaron's buses and Omnitrans to ride out to Ontario Airport, I'm not sure how long that would take me. It would be a long time. I can be to the Ontario Airport from my house in a private auto in about 15 minutes. So again, that time trade-off is something we've got to constantly be thinking about in terms of how the whole system works. I do use the air system a lot. I probably fly out of Ontario 2 or 3 times a month, sometimes more. So I'm very familiar with what happens there, the great work that's happening there. I've certainly seen the growth in activity. I'm a little concerned about the parking constraints there. And you show up for that 3 o'clock flight and maybe I needed to take the bus because there's no place to put that car. So again, there's a lot of factors that play in, and I think we've got to be constantly thinking about how does the overall transportation system network tie together. And that really begins from when the person leaves from their origin until the time they get on that aircraft to go wherever they're ultimately headed. And I guess the bottom line is that holistic approach is absolutely critical. I've been working with Michael and the folks out in San Bernardino about the hydrogen program. And again, I think that's a really important area and some great tie-ins. At Foothill Transit, we're taking delivery of one of the largest hydrogen fuel cell bus fleets at 33 buses, but potentially growing. Getting green hydrogen and getting it at a reasonable price is going to be critical to that sustainability component. So again, the networks, the systems, they all tie together, they all integrate, and we've got to continue to think about how do we make it better, faster, easier for everybody who's using that whole system.
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Doran. Two great, I just want to say those individuals are two great supporters of the Leonard Transportation Center, and I think.
Can I add one more thing? I heard Michael loud and clear about the security concerns too.
Yeah.
Duly noted, and
Yep.
It is certainly something that's a challenge for us in the current environment more than ever. So it's
Agreed.
definitely something that I think as an industry, we're very focused on.
All right. Thank you. And Justin, I'd like to turn it over. So building off of what we've heard, thinking about the multimodal, but also the work that HNTB is doing out at the Ontario Airport and projecting. How does this work in with some of the ideas and the concepts that you're working on over at ONT?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and the airport is really thinking about, and we're helping them think through how to move folks quickly through the system, right? Or from their home to their outstation at the airport. And that comes through advancing air service. It comes through making parking convenient, makes it having transit connections, and easy wayfinding through the whole system. And also if you're lugging baggage and going on a long trip, how do you make that process not climbing many stairs with your bag and clank, clank, clank through it with an elevator out of service, right? So there are many things that are being thought through right now. And one thing that just as an aside kind of makes me laugh, I ran into this really great map store last week when I was out in Boston, and they have these historical maps of transit from lots of different cities. And I happened to find one from Southern California region. I have it up on the screen. I don't know if sharing is disabled or not, but this is from 1939. Let me see if it's possible to share. No, it's disabled.
Wait,
And
Rafi can give you permission to share.
Great. There we go. Can you see that on the screen here?
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, this is from 1939. It's the rail network from Southern California. And it's just outstanding that from 80 years ago, we had such a great network that all got torn out for highways, roadways, other things. And if we had used this as our basis and 80 years of building on this, really great public transportation system, seamless connections, we'd be in a lot better shape now. It was really striking when I saw this just last weekend. But trying to recreate this in strategic ways to maximize the urban sprawl that we have and accommodate as many people as possible from rail, from road, from airs, really fascinating challenge that OIA is thinking through. And I turn to some of the things that we've been talking about in this conversation about advanced air mobility and trying to make that an equitable process and what kind of use cases could feasibly be accommodated at Ontario International Airport. In my presentation, I spoke about the cargo use cases, which I certainly see taking cargo and freight from airport or from warehouse out to destination or to another warehouse. But the passenger side is really interesting. And I think one of the things that we're talking about as a group is making sure that this isn't haves versus have-nots, where the premium passengers get to bypass Southern California traffic, go right to the gate. How do we make this an equitable process? And is that something that the airport authority wants to allow? And working with a few other airports in the Western United States, kind of thinking through these ideas right now. And specific to the tunnel, the colleagues on the phone here or on the Zoom brought up great points about employees. I think typically when we see automated people mover connections from airports to transit or other kinds of connections, it is primarily the employees, and that's where the majority of the ridership forecast goes. I think what will be interesting to me, particularly as this system will one day integrate with Brightline and trips out to Vegas, whether or not that air service connection between Vegas and Southern California gets so impacted from a capacity standpoint that it really makes it an attractive alternative to meet at Rancho Station and take your train out to Vegas, or take a train from Vegas, come out to Southern California and hop a flight out of town. That remains to be seen whether or not that's a possibility, but it is one of the largest air service markets between Southern California and Vegas. I think there's something in the neighborhood of 80 flights each way per day. And those folks that make that drive on Friday nights and Sunday morning returns from a long weekend in Vegas, can sympathize sitting in traffic. But once you get out past the Inland Empire, it's a pretty reasonable drive. So getting across getting across the LA Basin is really the main challenge there.
All right.
So packed a lot in that one there. I'll
Yeah.
Stop sharing.
Thanks so much, Justin. That's great. We'll have a shout out for the Urban Movement Labs. They have an event today looking at advanced aviation mobility on the horizon. And so thinking about that, and if you have our advanced air mobility, if you have a chance to join them today and looking further into this topic. And then we have a question from our friends at SCAG, Southern California Association of Governments. So perhaps could order a drone view of my entire trip that shows me transit is workable even with my heavy luggage and golf clubs. So possibly, Arnold, you never know, there could be a connection there. We've talked a lot about the workforce, and so I want to, and the ability of the workforce to use more of this multimodal system. But I also want to bring it forward to each of our speakers and thinking about new jobs or job opportunities within this field. And are you seeing any advancements within workforce development around the development of aviation as part of the multimodal sector? And, if whoever wants to start with that, you're welcome to start. Or Clint, do you want to start with that? All right.
Sure. Yeah, I can talk particularly, from a, I guess more of an outsider perspective, and then, I'll let the other panelists, add some more local granularity to that. But I know, from my work in Utah, so one of my additional duties, I guess, additional roles, as the state airport system planner was also the economic development lead for the state, and so early on we were looking at what kind of jobs, could advanced air mobility bring to the various airports and all that. And so, going back to the whole, airports as a, these intermodal hubs and what kind of jobs they can bring. So one of the things that really, I guess, got me interested in the Aerotropolis concept was, as I was studying that, I looked at, the jobs that were created, particularly at the Salt Lake City International Airport, and the job density around the airport. And what I noticed there, and this is, Salt Lake City in particular, but the job density at the airport was equal to the job density in the central business district of downtown Salt Lake City. With the primary difference being the jobs around the airport were more accessible jobs. You didn't have to have an advanced degree, and they were pretty well paying. jobs. And so, again, when I talked about, how can I replicate the benefits of a large international airport at smaller airports, that was one of the things that we looked at. And so with that in mind, we started looking at, what kind of skills are going to be needed in the future with advanced air mobility. So we're looking at like composites, manufacturing, the electric motors, that technology, all these different ecosystems, I guess, that have already been developed, for transit, for electric vehicles, within the other modes. How can we start leveraging that to position, the people that I worked for previously, to be competitive in that market. And I think that, from just what I'm hearing, there's been a lot of success in that. There's been a lot of visits to the state, from various eVTOL OEMs, looking at the capacity, workforce development capacity, workforce, existing workforce, that can be transitioned, into this new space. And so I think just from that perspective, I think that shows you that, the workforce opportunities that are associated with this industry are pretty huge. And I think the sooner you can get working on developing, what that's going to look like for an airport or a particular region, whether it be like, maintenance, servicing, pilots, operators, dispatch personnel, all the traditional jobs that we associate, with airlines, just scaled back, but also to, what kind of, if we are successful in creating these multimodal centers and we get these economic synergies that have come out of it, what other kind of jobs are going to be created for that? So, is there going to be more office jobs, other, or what they call aviation enabled jobs, so, distribution facilities, things of that nature. So just kind of looking at it, from a very wide swath of what's possible, and then start honing in on, where the strong points are within the local region is kind of the direction that we took.
Yeah, that's great. Because as we look and see, sort of just the evolution of the job market within our region, within the Inland Empire, and how it's changing and where it's going. And so I think the aviation piece is going to be an important part of our and overall transportation sector is going to be an important part of our future workforce needs. And as an educator within the region, and I see we have our San Bernardino Valley College partners here as well, really thinking about how education can respond to these needs, and what we need to do. And there's not a great sort of give and take or conversation around that. And it takes a long time, I'll just throw this out there, for education to plan and put together new programs. So hopefully we can develop additional conversations to really think about the future and what's needed there within workforce. Michael, did you have something to bring forward?
Yes, so the airport has a master plan that they've been working on in conjunction with your IVDA, the Inland Valley Workforce Development that they have. And to the southern portion of the airport, they really did a nice job with reinventing that area, because repurposing it with corporate headquarters, a lot of in and out warehouses and freight. And we're less than 5 miles away from the intermodal, which really helps with this process. So the airport in their efforts with their design for their projects has actually increased the daytime employment to 17,000 employees in the daytime. And that's only to the southern portion of this. And now they're working their way around from the west, working to north. And there's a number of pieces they've been able to assemble on the northern portion of this. So you're going to see a lot more development in that area, bringing dollars as far as property values and jobs and things of that nature. You have to realize that when the airport was decommissioned, we lost a lot of jobs there. And then on top of that, with the rail, we lost a lot of jobs too, with Union Pacific and all the maintenance they're going to Ohio and other places east. And so they had to basically reinvent themselves, and they're actually growing 17,000 daytime jobs that they're basically being created, which is amazing. And that's only going to grow even much further than that.
All right, thank you. Justin, thoughts on workforce?
Yeah, it's a topic I'm very passionate about. Certainly OIAA is an economic behemoth in the region, the airport itself, and just some of the businesses around it. So UPS has their Western regional hub at the airport, and anybody that's driven along the south side right around shift change, you experience the sheer power of workforce numbers right in that area. And it's impressive. And there's not a lot of great transit options for that. And we're talking about putting the effort behind passenger connection on the north side where the terminals are to other transit. There are some bus lines and other things on the south, but there's going to be some further cargo growth and lots of additional jobs created that are, pretty decently paying, but we need to be mindful of some of the operating costs of folks sitting in traffic, being able to get there efficiently, having places to park or alternative ways to get there. Multimodally, UPS has an offshoot called the UPS Flight Forward, which is their AAM group. I've done some work with them, trying to understand some of their requirements and what they're looking at. But they've got innovative job creation and different types of engineers, software engineers, mechanics, pilots, other things that potentially could be significantly added to this West Hub at Ontario and taking advantage of all the various facilities they have. The Boot property that I spoke about that's out for development of 3 million feet of 3 million square feet of warehouse. I mean, it's just going to add an incredible number of opportunities, both on the construction side and also long-term, pretty decently paying jobs, as well as management positions. So there's a lot of opportunities. The airport has grown and recovered really quickly. So as everyone keeps hearing in the news, the challenge of getting the right workforce and scaled back, the airline, same issue. It's going to be difficult, and making sure that there's outreach to the local universities, technical colleges, high schools is really important. I know OIAA has done a good job of that with internships in their management organization, as well as some of the tenants and other operators there is absolutely critical. And making sure that folks have great critical thinking skills. I mean, the universities and the colleges and the high schools are all fantastic out in Inland Empire and Southern California as a whole, and they promote that. And there's a reason they have such great reputations. And getting folks that critical thinking skills can really apply them to almost any job that they face.
Mhm. Yeah, it's one thing that I'm always pushing my students on is just that, being able to critically think and strategically think and then communicate how they're thinking. So that's the other side, is that communication, verbal and written. Before I move on to my next question, I'd like to open it up so it's not just the Kimberly Collins show here, but others who would like to ask any questions. Anyone? All right,
Yeah,
well,
I have a question.
please, Rafi.
So first, thank you all for the presentations. They were very interesting. And being new to the region and for this particular sector, which is the aviation sector, I heard in the presentations, you guys spoke about logistics also, and the airports are supporting the logistic industry, and the Inland Empire being a part, kind of an inland port now, and supporting this huge service. How do you think airports can help in kind of giving back to the community? Or I don't know how you guys want to frame it, kind of how we can also help the communities around the airports and around these logistic companies to give back to the Inland Empire in that regards. And thank you.
Maybe I'll start my answer by saying having these facilities with such great proximity to the residents also means speed to market or speed to home. So that's somewhat of an advantage for folks that live in the vicinity of the Inland Empire, because so much of the storage is and delivery and infrastructure is in the Inland Empire. There's opportunities for 2-hour delivery from coming off of a plane if we can get some of the right new technologies in place. So there's perhaps that incentive. Now there are some challenges too, right? So having all of this development there, lots of trucks, making sure that we can clean up trucks, whether it's hydrogen trucks or electric trucks in the future, something that we need to be mindful of to make sure that we're offsetting some of the benefits or offsetting some of the challenges with some benefits and trying to reduce the impact on communities in and around the airport and some of these distribution centers.
Others, Michael or Clint, do you have any thoughts on?
Sure. The airport has a group of folks that do outreach to the communities. They also work with the different corporate entities in the area for sponsorships within and through the community. And they do a pretty good job within basically 5 cities surrounding the airport. And to what Justin just said, the airport actually brings in lower costs because it's time to market, and it helps the overall economy, not just with the jobs, but also, given opportunity and the cost basis. And also on the EV charging side that we're doing right now, we're putting these in for the surrounding communities as well. There's a site we're looking at, not only going to be for the hydrogen recharging station, but also EV charging station for the community. So they can get obviously a lower cost for charging the vehicles and something that's convenient. So we have, like I said, a dedicated group that works and brings in the corporate sponsors as well as the airport to help the community at large. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
I was wondering if you could restate the question again for me.
I'll just quickly. So, there's a lot of development, there's a lot of movement of goods. And, of course, there's in any type of development, there's going to be a cost to your community. So really thinking about what is the footprint and what are the possibilities for improving the communities around, or the folks that live around these facilities. What are the opportunities there?
Gotcha. Yeah. So that's a really, really big one, and going back to, there's many things that got me motivated to engage in this industry, and I've talked a lot about that Uber white paper. So, one of the things I noticed when I first looked at that Uber white paper was a rooftop parking garage that was converted to a vertiport, that concept. And from an aviation perspective, I thought there was a lot of merit to that concept. If a permeable facility, underutilized, top deck of that parking structure, can be leveraged for something. But what really concerned me was, just looking at that, I knew the planning mind, said that's going to take zoning updates, it's going to take permitting updates, it's going to take a land use policy. There's a lot of things that happen behind the scenes, and eventually, a local planner is going to have to hold a public meeting and explain to the public, why these changes are being made and how that's going to benefit them. And at that time, and even for probably a year afterwards, the industry had been talking about all the great things that it's going to do without speaking with communities, without speaking with the folks that are going to be impacted by this. And I think that kind of speaks to some of those lessons that we've learned from our transportation planning history, is that we often plan for the sake of the users, but also to the detriment of the non-users. And in airports, struggle with that issue as well, where a lot of the communities that are impacted by airport noise emissions often don't have the same level of accessibility to those resources that are at the airport that the people actually using that are. And when I initiated an economic impact study for the airports within Utah, we did a kind of an experimental, look at, where are those economic impacts being experienced. So we took a look at all the airport badges, where the contracts are coming from, and just kind of did a zip code search, and all the economic impact that we were able to attribute to the airport. Very little of it was being felt in the surrounding zip codes right around the airport, those struggling communities and disadvantaged communities. Most of those benefits were being felt more regionally, out beyond the immediate reaches of the airport. So there was this donut effect, and so that highlighted the need that we really need to talk with the community early. We need to understand that, this is not just going to impact users and bring economic benefits to the users, but we also need to think about the non-users as well, which for aviation, there are many. And the sooner we can start those conversations, the sooner we can get to the real brass tacks of, how we need to move forward and how, an equitable aviation intervention into the transportation system is going to look.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that. And it leads me to my next kind of question, and thinking about, the pieces around, and we all know, well, I grew up in LA as well, and sort of the conversations around LAX for many years around the surrounding communities and the growth of that airport, And then a lot of the reason why there was this movement out east and also to Burbank Airport, but thinking about the Ontario Airport as it plays a role. And so putting it into this idea of this highly concentrated urban areas versus the suburban areas, and from Justin and looking at what, you know, the presentation and the ideas around the Ontario Airport and the build out of that facility, how do we see sort of these important pieces of, and I'm a social scientist, so you'll forgive me, but geography and how geography mixes into the airports. What do we see about, you know, the future of sort of the placement of airports and the role of airports within the geography, within a suburban area, more of the Inland Empire, versus those highly concentrated urban areas? That might be too complex, might be a dissertation out there, but thinking about some of those pieces as well. I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I definitely do. I mean, folks probably remember not that long ago that Ontario International Airport was part of Los Angeles World Airports up until 2016. And then there's local control now of that facility. And it was always envisioned as part of the master plan that that was the reliever to LAX. And it would accommodate upwards of 30 million annual passengers, probably by 2020 or so, which didn't quite hit that target. I was involved in the last master plan, which was stopped by the economic recession in 2008, which we were looking at, I forget what the forecast calls for, but 10, 12 million annual passengers, probably 2015 or so, right? So clearly we didn't hit that. But within those plans, there was looking at long-term ways to accommodate a wide variety of international and domestic traffic once LAX hits its cap. Now, as it's its own entity, it needs to chart its own course and looking at what it needs to serve the local community around it, no longer as just a reliever for LAX as a standalone airport. And there is a pretty big difference to that. It's not, we'll take the scraps. No, we want to serve the community around us because there's a lot of people. It's frankly one of the only growing regions in Southern California, or the fastest growing region in Southern California right now. So there's just a lot of opportunity. And we're not going to see the development of new airports very much, probably in our lifetime. I'm working on one of the last ones, which is a reliever and a new supplemental commercial airport to Las Vegas, Southern Nevada Supplemental Airport, which is right on the border of the state line, or will be on the border of the state line with California and Nevada. But it takes so much political will, land use control to do something new. We really have to plan for the future, be able to get more juice out of the existing oranges that we have by squeezing harder, by building more efficient facilities, and serving the community that wants to be served. And I think this airport has done a great job of figuring out what it wants to be, how it can be a community asset, and how it can position for growth in the future.
Great, thank you for that, Justin. And interesting, right on the state line. My mother would have been very happy to have that airport when she loved going to state line, but that's another story. Michael, any thoughts, or Clint on?
Well, you know, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You build another airport, what's going to happen? You're going to have growth around the airport, and then you're going to get kicked out or have issues with noise and things of that nature. So, and to Justin's point, as you know, probably not going to build any new airports, although there are some being built in Texas, but that's Texas. And so in our area over here, we're just going to have to do more with less, and to be more efficient with what we currently have, and be obviously respectful of the community that's around us. And this is, there's not much more that we can do than what we're already kind of doing, but it's just plan wisely for in and around the airport. That's about the best we can do. And hopefully with the public transportation and the safety issues involved, and being more efficient, you know, BNSF just made an announcement about a little over a week ago. They're building a new intermodal out in not Hesperia, but out towards the desert area, and they're going to spend $1.4 billion in doing so. So that's going to help with the move of goods, and it's even going to make our intermodals even more valuable as well, because it's going to get those goods faster, to where they need to be, and hopefully relieve the ports as well with Alameda Corridor East that's already in place, and make that actually work, because it really hasn't been working to the degree it should. But what I'm trying to say is to relieve the pressure that we already have through some of these intermodals and trains, which are very efficient in moving product, that will lighten the load for the airports and things of that nature. Still, it's utilizing our air freight is amazing, but we need to have other partners in the area as well to help relieve the congestion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, and I think in terms of like, what lessons have we learned in the past that we can draw from? So, airports were historically sited, away from communities, kind of out in the middle of nowhere, so that those negative externalities would have much of an impact. And then as communities expanded outward and sprawled outwards, they intersected with the airports. And I think that kind of created a knee-jerk reaction from the aviation industry and saying that now we need to protect these airports at all costs. We got to have, nothing but aeronautical uses on and around the airport, and so I think, that's really made it difficult, at least in my experience, particularly around some of the smaller airports, of creating this cluster, this economic cluster, where you have symbiotic relationships between airports and the land uses surrounding the airports. If you look at what Denver International Airport has done with their relatively new airport, they sited it way out there, outside of Denver. But then they immediately created this plan of how they're going to use the lands around that airport, to create that aerotropolis concept, where you have complementing land uses, and weren't putting, residents or other people that might otherwise be negatively impacted by the negative externalities, close in. And so I think that's kind of the model where, as we bounce between knee-jerk reactions, now we're kind of settling into this new precedent, that I think it was explained very well, where we plan wisely. Let's look at, where the new facilities are and plan wisely around, like, how does this look at when we do experience growth and encroachment or potential encroachment, and think smartly about what that's going to look like and how we can get the most use out of those lands, while at the same time protecting community members as well.
That's great. Thank you for that. Again, I'll throw it open to the crowd because I do have one more question for you all in thinking about the mix between, and starting with Clint's presentation on being that catalyst or that nexus between business, government, and civil society. And so I'll throw out my question and then we'll tackle this, but then I'd like, if anyone has any further questions, we're going to be wrapping up in just a bit. So looking at the regulatory environment, and I know it's huge, again, around aviation, but any thoughts on the current regulatory environment? As we heard, the FAA has really controls these airport sites. And how is that working? Because as I, again, going back into putting on my teacher hat here, my professor hat, a big piece that I also like to share with my students, or have us all think about, is really, as we look for 21st century governance, is the role of government, the role of business, and the role of civil society in moving these projects forward so that we get the greatest benefit for the communities. Playing off what you're talking about, Clint, but any thoughts on the regulatory environment and sort of how we can make this work the best for all of those engaged? And we have our city council member here as well, and we have them all sitting around the room with us, our government, our business, and our civil society. So please, thoughts.
Well, Kimberly, that's a loaded question.
I know it is.
I
like loaded questions. Bring it out there.
So our cities constantly fight with local control issues. As government gets bigger, they tax us more, they slow down the process. And it is a problem that we deal with on a regular basis at the city level. We find ourselves constantly battling Sacramento, for instance. And I don't know if everyone's known this, but a couple of weeks ago, the Sacramento stealthily at night raised everyone's taxes. The top rate you're going to pay is 14.4%, top bracket. And everyone from $46,000 on up got a bump too. And so when they use that monies for things that we might not necessarily agree with or are politically challenging. So in a nutshell, what that means is they're grabbing more control and more power. As it is now, we're starting to lose our planning capabilities at the city level. And like with airports, federally regulated, but you also have to deal with certain environmental issues that are pushed down from the state and the federal, and you kind of get twixt in between. Like government, there's a good reason, obviously, to have government for many different things, but they also slow down and hinder the process. And we're going to get less for more money. And it's just, we need to find a nexus that everything works and the government can step out of the way and let folks do what they need to do. The capitalist way of doing business is probably the most efficient way. Yes, it gets out of control at times, but we have to dial back government control if we want to move forward with some good positive growth to really help the communities out. Thank
I
you.
knew that's what you were going to say, Michael. But
I have some real issues with Sacramento. It's a daily problem that we have to deal with. And Doran can attest to that as well, right, Doran?
Yeah, I was gonna say, Michael, you were very restrained in your comments today. Usually you're.
Well,
much
I
more
didn't
animated.
call them communists, did I?
No, exactly. I'm impressed. So, yeah, usually there's much more arm waving, so.
much more arm waving.
I'm being
Right.
very respectful and restrained for Kimberly's sake today.
Thank you.
You
Because
are.
we get into it, our debate, but then we would bore everybody. But Justin, please.
Yeah, so I deal a lot more with the federal type requirements. And one of the things that's been a positive development in streamlining some development has been what's called a Section 163 reauthorization. It's allowed for some non-aeronautical development to streamline the NEPA process and streamline the airport layout plan approval process. And basically not being required. Still have CEQA requirements to make sure that we hit on. Those are somewhat onerous sometimes and litigious, particularly in the Inland Empire. That's a separate discussion. I'll get fired up, kind of like Michael was on his last topic, but it has helped somewhat. But there's been challenges in the way it's been rolled out, and it's been inconsistently applied from region to region. It's slowed down because it's added more work for our local FAA planners that then have to review it and approve it. And then all of a sudden, it's actually slower than doing the full NEPA process and airport layout plan. So it's still a process, and it's early. It's only been 2018, but since 2018, but they're still figuring it out. And I think ultimately it will help development. It helped that boot property development be not applicable to NEPA and streamline the ability for OIA to go to market. So there's some benefits there, but there's complex regulations. We're always looking at safety enhancements, other things constantly to make sure that we have the best aeronautical system in the world. And there are challenges with it. There are obstacles to it. But as long as we understand it and can work proactively with folks that are making that policy and interpreting the policy, we can get things done.
Great. Thank you, Justin. And Clint?
Yeah, that's a hard act to follow. On that one. So when it comes to the regulatory, so I'll kind of simplify this. I think early on within this, you saw a lot of communities and even regions, that we're looking at, how do we protect our residents? How do we, answer the concerns of the community, and so they started looking at, where can we assert authority? And I think on the airspace side, is where a lot of communities let out, which is very tricky because, the FAA, is congressionally mandated, to provide and to have jurisdictional authority over the airspace, over navigable airspace, I should say, and anytime you have an aircraft starting to, go through the air, you have an aircraft that's navigating. And so that's made it very difficult for communities and cities to really engage, in a really meaningful way on those kind of issues. The FAA has also envisioned AAM under 4 other ecosystem areas. So airspace being one of them. The aircraft, the operations, the infrastructure, and the community are other ecosystem spheres that the FAA is conceptualizing all this through. And so, some of the work that we did for Los Angeles looked at, where do cities have the most influence? Well, we already know that airspace, is kind of tricky, but we should have a seat at the table. Similarly for aircraft operations, so when they go and get their certifications to operate commercially, which is also known as a Part 135 certification, I think cities have an opportunity and communities have an opportunity to be at the table during that decision making, but doesn't have a direct influence, over what that's going to look like. The infrastructure, I think, is the biggest piece that communities and local jurisdictions have authority over. So where are these going to go? Where are the airports going to go? The vertiports. The FAA has been very clear that they don't make those kind of decisions for the cities. They can approve not approve. They can agree with the decision. They can disagree with the decision. They can have concerns over the decisions, but they ultimately can't tell a community, that they can or cannot put, any kind of aviation infrastructure, in point A or point B, unless they're the ones funding that infrastructure. So it gets kind of tricky on that spot. So where do we have the most authority? And let's focus our efforts there, which I think is infrastructure. The next thing is not to be surprised. So all those other 4 ecosystem areas, particularly the airspace, the aircraft, and the operations, what can we do to be to remain aware and to remain at the table? These decisions are being made. So when is the FAA or when are these operators going to get their Part 135 certifications, which will trigger a NEPA analysis, which will also provide for a public comment period. That might be the best that communities have, on kind of getting their own awareness and providing feedback into the system, is these public comment periods, of which that Part 160 or Section 163 that you spoke of was just up for a policy change, and that public comment period on that policy change closed last night. And so there, the FAA has defined, and of some people's perspective, kind of whittled away some of that the benefits that Section 163 had provided to airports by adding more bureaucratic red tape into the process. And then finally, if we're going to, if we identify a need for new regulations, for new policies, that takes resources. So one thing that Urban Movement Labs cannot do, in the work that I cannot do, we can't formally plan, we can't formally create policy. That has to be done by the city staff, the people at the city that do that kind of work, which then has to be driven by, the elected officials, there's a balance in there, and particularly in LA, where we've done a lot of groundwork. We have a lot of baseline information, foundational knowledge, and we've got a seat at the table, at many of these things. But what we don't have is a city council motion to create policy around this. And so that's something that, is still in the future. And for many communities is still, kind of down the road, is when are they going to get city councils to direct them to do this kind of work? And similarly at state level, when are state legislatures going to direct the state resources to also create, complementing regulations and kick all that process off. So I'll leave that at that.
Very complex in thinking about all of the different actors and the voices that need to be part of the table, and how do we organize that in a way that it doesn't slow down the process so much, so that you can't get anything done, but also being able to have a balance so that those different voices are there. With that, we have time for one more question, if anyone has something. I got all my questions answered. Well, if not, then I would like to thank our speakers. Thank you very much. I learned so much today. It was great hearing from you and being part of this. I'd also like to thank all of our sponsors of the dialogues. Of course, some of our major sponsors for this session is HNTB. Thank you, Justin, and thank you, Matt, for being here and dinging off a new sort of generation of HNT employees, part of our process. And also our 2 other major sponsors are San Bernardino International Airport. So thanks to Mike Burrows over there, but also Michael Alawals. And I look forward to having additional, collaborations with the airport and figuring out how best we can get the university and the airport facilities working together. And then, of course, Ontario International Airport, another one of our major sponsors, is at the table. And then I'd like to just quickly thank our silver sponsors in being Metrolink, Southern California Gas, and hold on, I lost them here. There's many of them. Sorry, give me a moment here. Woodruff, Spratlin and Smart, as well as, did I get them all? SoCal Gas, Woodlands, Freeland and Smart, and MetroLink, yes. And then SCAG also, sorry. It's my SCAG partners out there, Southern California Association of Governments. And then we have a multiple of great silver sponsors. If you're interested in sponsoring Foothill Transit as well as Omnitrans, two of our major sponsors and collaborators on this, if you're interested in sponsoring, please contact me and let me know. We will be having a 2023 dialogue series, and we're in the midst of putting that together. If you have any thoughts on topics you'd like to hear or any ideas that you'd like to discuss, please let us know. And then finally, I would like to thank the LTC staff, Rafi in particular, for stepping in and helping out so much and putting together this dialogue, and the new member of our staff, Vaishnavi Road, who is a student and really been a great sort of support of this. With that, I wish you all a very good day, a good rest of the week, and I look forward to seeing you at our next dialogue on December 13th, where we delve into the topic of cybersecurity and transportation. So take care, everyone. We'll see you
Thank
soon.
you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Bye.